Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment from the restaurant, the feel of the keys under her fingers, the sound of her own playing filling the space. The faces of people moved to tears by her music. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The videos had exploded across social media. By midnight, the main video had 500,000 views. By morning, it was over 2 million. Comments poured in from all over the world. I'm literally crying. This is what pure talent looks like. How is she working as a waitress? Someone sign her immediately. This is the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Elena scrolled through them, her heart pounding. This was surreal. 12 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now thousands of strangers were talking about her, sharing her music, asking questions about who she was. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Is this Elena Martinez, the pianist from Giorgio's restaurant? Yes, this is Elena. Hi. I'm calling from Morning Chicago, the news show. We'd love to have you on the program Monday morning. Your story is incredible. Everyone's talking about you. Would you be interested? Elena's mouth went dry. The news? I don't know if... Please think about it. Here's my number. We'd love to share your story. A classically trained pianist working as a waitress, surprising everyone with an impromptu performance that went viral. It's exactly the kind of inspiring story people need right now. After she hung up, Elena's phone rang again. Another news outlet. Then a podcast. Then a blog that covered classical music. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted to know her story. She turned off her phone and went to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she made coffee. This was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But underneath the panic, something else was stirring. Excitement. Hope. The feeling that maybe her life was about to change in ways she'd stopped letting herself imagine. Saturday morning. Elena's mother called on the landline. Mia, turn on the computer. You're on the news. Everyone is sharing this video. Mrs. Delgado from church called me. She saw you playing piano and said, I didn't know Elena was so talented. And I thought, yes, of course she is. But I never see you play anymore, and Mama, it just happened. I didn't plan it. Sometimes the best things we don't plan. Her mother's voice grew soft. Elena, your father wants to talk to you. There was shuffling, then her father's voice came on the line. He'd recovered from his stroke, but his speech was still slower than before. Elena, I saw the video. You were beautiful, so beautiful. Thanks, Papa. I need to say something. He paused, gathering his words. 3 years ago, you stopped playing to help us, to help me. I never asked you to do that, Papa. You needed... Let me finish. You gave up your dreams for family. That was noble. That was love. But Elena, you have paid that debt. More than paid it. Your mother and I, we don't need you to sacrifice anymore. We need you to be who you're meant to be. Elena's eyes filled with tears. But what if I fail? What if it's too late? What if I'm not good enough anymore? You think anyone who saw that video thinks you're not good enough? Her father laughed, that warm sound she'd missed during the worst days of his illness. Elena, the world is telling you right now that you're extraordinary. Maybe it's time you listen. After hanging up, Elena sat with her coffee and thought about what her father said. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent hiding her talent. She thought about Catherine and Robert's story, about how one concert had changed the entire trajectory of their lives. Maybe one performance could change hers too. She picked up the business card that David Chen, the music producer, had given her. She'd been carrying it in her pocket since last night. She stared at it for a long time, then pulled out her phone and typed a message. Hi, Mr. Chen, this is Elena Martinez from Giorgio's. I'd like to talk about what's next. The response came within 5 minutes. Can you meet me Monday at 10 a.m.? I have some ideas I think you'll want to hear. Monday morning, Elena sat in a sleek office downtown, feeling completely out of place in her nicest dress, which wasn't very nice. David Chen's office was filled with awards and photos of famous musicians. On his desk was a tablet showing her video, which now had over 5 million views. Elena, let me be direct, he said. What I saw Friday night was exceptional. But I've looked into your background. Chicago Conservatory, graduated with honors, competition wins. You're not just talented. You're trained at the highest level. Why aren't you performing? She told him everything. Her father's stroke, the family's financial crisis, the choice she'd made. the 3 years of practical living that had buried her dreams. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. Here's what I'm thinking. The video went viral not just because you're talented, but because your story resonates. People love seeing someone reclaim their dreams. They love watching talent emerge from unexpected places. This isn't just about your music. It's about your journey. What are you suggesting? A concert. A proper debut. We book a respected venue. We promote your story and we let you show Chicago what you can do. I have connections at the Symphony Center. I think I can get you a slot 3 months from now. Elena's heart stopped. The Chicago Symphony Center? Yes, now it won't be the main hall. We'd booked the smaller venue, but it's still prestigious, still important. And I think we could sell it out based on the interest you're already generating. 3 months? I haven't performed seriously in years. I'd need to prepare, so prepare. You have 3 months to rebuild your repertoire. Work with a coach I'll recommend and get performance ready. Can you do it? Elena thought about her hands on the piano keys. About the feeling of making music again. About that rush of playing for people who understood what they were hearing. Yes, she said. I can do it. Good, one more thing. Giorgio's called me. Mr. Russo wants to offer you a position as their resident pianist. 4 nights a week, playing during dinner service. It pays 3 times what you make as a waitress. It would give you income while you prepare for the concert. Elena felt dizzy. He wants to pay me to play piano? At the restaurant? He says you transformed his business. People have been calling nonstop trying to book reservations, hoping to hear you play. He's smart. He's capitalizing on the moment. But it's good for you too. You get to practice performing for audiences, you make decent money, and you build a following. Everything was moving so fast. 3 days ago, she'd been invisible. Now she had a concert booking at Symphony Center and a job offer as a professional pianist. I need to think, Elena said. Of course, but don't think too long. Viral moments fade fast. We need to strike while people remember your name. Elena walked out of his office in a daze. She wandered through downtown Chicago, past the Art Institute, past Millennium Park. She found herself standing in front of Symphony Center, the venue where the greatest musicians in the world performed. In 3 months, she could be on that stage. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Her phone buzzed. A text from Catherine, the woman from the anniversary dinner. Dear Elena, Robert and I wanted you to know that Friday night was the most magical anniversary we've ever had. You gave us a memory we'll treasure forever. Whatever you do next, know that your music changes lives. It changed ours 50 years ago when we met at a concert, and it changed ours again when you played for us. Thank you. Elena stared at that message. Music changes lives. It had changed Catherine and Robert's lives. It had changed hers when she was 7 years old and first touched piano keys. And now it was changing her life again, pulling her back to who she really was. She called Mr. Russo. I'll take the pianist position, and I'll give you my best every night, she called David Chen. Book the concert. I'll be ready. The next 3 months were the hardest and most fulfilling of Elena's life. She practiced 6 hours a day, rebuilding the calluses on her fingers, strengthening the muscles in her hands and arms. She worked with a performance coach who helped her overcome the stage anxiety she'd developed from years away from performing. 4 nights a week, she played at Giorgio's. The restaurant was booked solid months in advance. People came from all over just to hear the viral Waitress play. Elena performed everything from classical masterpieces to jazz standards to contemporary pieces. She got comfortable with audiences again, learned to read a room, discovered how to create intimacy even in a crowded restaurant. The other servers treated her differently now. Not worse, just different. She wasn't one of them anymore. She was the talent, the draw. Tony told her he was proud of her, but also a little sad. Feels like we're losing you, he said. You're not losing me, Elena assured him. I'm just becoming who I always was. As the concert date approached, Elena's nerves grew. This wasn't a restaurant. This was a real concert hall with real critics and people who'd paid real money to hear her play. What if she wasn't as good as they expected? What if the viral video had been a fluke? But every time doubt crept in, she remembered that Friday night. The feeling of her hands on the keys, the joy on Catherine's face, the way music had poured out of her like it had been waiting 3 years to be released. She was ready. The night of the concert. Elena stood backstage at Symphony Center in an elegant black gown. Her mother and father sat in the 3rd row. Catherine and Robert had flown in from their winter home in Florida just for this. Mr. Russo had brought his entire family. Diane and Tony and half the staff from Giorgio's filled a whole section. The house was sold out. 700 people waiting to hear her play. Elena walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and warm. The grand piano gleamed. The audience applauded as she took her seat at the bench. She looked out at the faces. All these people who'd come to hear her story told through music. All these people who believed in her enough to be here. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She performed for 90 minutes without intermission. Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, Liszt. Pieces she'd learned years ago and pieces she'd learned in the past 3 months. She played with technical brilliance and emotional depth. She played with the confidence of someone who'd found her way back home. When she played the Fantaisie Impromptu, the same piece she'd performed at the restaurant, people in the audience cried. When she finished her final piece, a thunderous Rachmaninoff prelude, the audience rose to their feet. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. People shouted for an encore. Elena returned to the stage and played one more piece. She chose Claire de Lune, the first piece she'd played that Friday night, the piece that had started everything. As the final notes faded, Elena looked out at the audience and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. She felt complete. She felt like herself. After the concert, Elena stood in the lobby meeting audience members. Catherine embraced her. "You did it. You became everything you were meant to be." "I never stopped being it," Elena realized. "I just forgot for a while." Her father hugged her tight. "I'm sorry you had to wait so long." "Don't be sorry, Papa. I'm not. I learned that sometimes we choose family over dreams, and that's okay. But I also learned that sometimes we get a second chance, and when we do, we have to be brave enough to take it." Over the next year, Elena's career blossomed. She recorded an album. She performed with orchestras. She gave interviews about her journey. But she also kept playing at Giorgio's 2 nights a week, because that piano in the corner of a restaurant was where she'd rediscovered herself, and she never wanted to forget that. And every time she performed, whether in a concert hall or a restaurant, Elena remembered that Friday night. The moment she'd stopped hiding. The moment she'd placed her hands on the piano keys and chosen to be seen. The moment she'd transformed from a waitress into the pianist she'd always been. Elena stood up from the piano, her legs unsteady. The applause was still going, washing over her in waves. She looked at Catherine and Robert, both on their feet, both crying happy tears. She'd given them something precious. A memory. A moment they'd talk about for the rest of their lives. She should walk away now. Return to work. Let this beautiful moment end before she pushed it too far, but something was happening inside her. Something she couldn't control. Playing those 2 pieces had been like opening a door she'd kept locked for years, and now that it was open, everything was flooding back. The hunger, the passion, the need to make music, not because someone asked, but because it was who she was. Elena looked at the piano, at her hands, at the keys that suddenly felt like they belonged to her more than anything else in the world. Before she could think about it, before reason could talk her out of it, she sat back down at the bench. The applause died down, replaced by confused murmurs. She'd already played 2 pieces. What was she doing? "There's one more," Elena said, her voice carrying across the now quiet restaurant. "One more piece I need to play." She didn't look at Mr. Russo, didn't check to see if this was okay. For the first time in 3 years, Elena wasn't asking permission. She was taking what was hers. Her fingers found the keys. This time she didn't choose something safe. She chose Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. A piece that required speed, precision, emotion, and absolute control. A piece that separated amateurs from professionals. A piece that would leave no doubt about who she really was. Elena took a breath and launched into it. The opening was explosive. Fast 16th notes in the right hand, a different rhythm in the left, both hands moving independently at lightning speed. It was the kind of playing that looked impossible if you didn't understand piano technique. Her fingers blurred across the keys. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. This wasn't background music. This wasn't gentle and pretty. This was virtuosic. This was showmanship. This was a trained musician operating at full power. Elena's body moved with the music, swaying, leaning into the dramatic moments. Her face reflected the emotion of each section, intense during the fast parts, tender during the lyrical middle section. She was completely lost in it now, aware of nothing but the piano and the sound pouring from it. The Fantaisie Impromptu was a journey. It started with that breathtaking speed, those cascading notes that seemed to tumble over each other. Then, it shifted into a sweet singing melody in the middle section, the part that everyone recognized even if they didn't know the piece's name. The contrast was stunning. Chaos giving way to beauty, then building back to chaos again. Elena's hands flew. Her fingers had played this piece so many times that they knew the way without conscious thought. Every leap, every trill, every dynamic change was burned into her muscle memory. This was what 10,000 hours of practice looked like. This was mastery. People in the restaurant had completely stopped eating. Forks rested on plates. Wine glasses sat untouched. Every single person was watching. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others had their mouths open in shock. Parents held their children, letting them witness something rare and beautiful. Even the kitchen staff had emerged. The head chef stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, nodding slowly. The dishwasher, a young guy named Luis who'd never said more than 2 words to Elena, was staring with wide eyes. Diane was openly crying. Tony had his phone up recording, but his hands were shaking so much the video was probably unusable. Mr. Russo looked like a man in shock. He'd hired Elena 3 years ago to serve food. He'd never imagined this. None of them had. The middle section of the Fantaisie Impromptu was where Elena let herself be vulnerable. The melody here was achingly beautiful, played with such tenderness that it felt like a lullaby. She thought about all the things she'd given up, all the dreams she'd put aside, all the years she'd spent pretending to be okay with a life that wasn't the one she'd wanted. But she also thought about why she'd done it. Her father's health, her family's needs, the practical reality that sometimes love meant sacrifice. There was no bitterness in that thought. Just acknowledgement, just truth. The tender section built back toward the frantic energy of the opening. Elena's hands picked up speed again, racing through the complex passages. This was the technical climax, the part where pianists either nailed it or fell apart. There was no room for error here. Every note had to be precise, perfectly timed, even at breakneck speed. Elena nailed it. Her fingers were a blur. The notes came so fast they almost blended together, creating a shimmering waterfall effect. Yet every single note was clear. Every single note rang true. This was the difference between someone who could play piano and someone who dedicated their life to it. She was breathing hard now, her whole body engaged in the physical act of playing. People didn't realize how athletic piano could be. Your arms, your back, your core, everything worked together to create sound. The piece raced toward its conclusion. The final runs descended down the keyboard like waterfalls, each hand moving, independently, creating the illusion that 2 pianists must be playing instead of 1. And then, after all that sound and fury, Chopin did something genius. He ended quietly. The last few measures slowed down, softened, like a whisper after a shout. Elena's fingers moved delicately through these final notes, each one placed with exquisite care. The very last chord was played softly, almost questioningly. It hung in the air for a moment that felt suspended in time. Then silence. Complete. Absolute silence. Elena kept her hands on the keys, her head bowed, her breath coming fast. She just played one of the hardest pieces in the repertoire, in a restaurant in her work uniform after not touching a piano for 8 months, and she'd played it perfectly. The silence stretched. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 5. Then the restaurant erupted. Not applause this time. A roar. People were on their feet, shouting, clapping, whistling. Some were crying, some were laughing with joy. The businessman at table 9 was yelling, "Brava! Brava!" in a voice that suggested he actually knew classical music. A woman Elena had never seen before rushed toward the piano, still clapping. "That was incredible. Where do you perform? I want to buy tickets." Catherine and Robert were both standing at their table holding each other, both crying. They weren't just witnessing an anniversary surprise anymore. They were witnessing something bigger, a resurrection, a transformation. Elena stood up from the piano, and her legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the piano for support. The adrenaline was wearing off, and she was shaking all over. Mr. Russo appeared at her side, his face unreadable. For a terrible moment, Elena thought he might be angry. She'd made a spectacle. She'd stopped working. She'd turned his restaurant into a concert hall without permission. But then he put his hand on her shoulder and said, "Elena, 3 years you've worked here. 3 years and you never told me you could do that. I'm sorry, I just don't apologize." His voice was thick with emotion. I don't even have words. You're an artist. A real artist. Diane pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Elena. "Why didn't you tell us? All this time we had no idea." "I didn't think it mattered anymore," Elena said, and realized she was crying too. "Didn't matter?" Tony joined them, his face incredulous. "Elena, that was... People pay hundreds of dollars to hear playing like that in concert halls." A man in an expensive suit approached. He was probably in his 40s with silver-rimmed glasses and an air of authority. Elena didn't recognize him as a regular customer. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is David Chen. I'm a music producer. I work with classical artists." He pulled out a business card and held it toward Elena. "I need to talk to you about your career, about getting you on stage, about getting your talent in front of people who need to hear it." Elena stared at the business card like it was written in a foreign language. I'm not really performing right now. I work here." "You were just performing," he said gently. "And everyone in this room knows they witnessed something special. You have a gift that the world needs to hear. Please, take my card. Call me when you're ready to talk." More people crowded around. Some wanted to shake her hand. Some wanted to take photos with her. Some just wanted to tell her how the music had made them feel. An older woman said it reminded her of her late husband. A teenage girl said she'd been thinking about quitting piano lessons, but now she wanted to keep going. Elena's phone started buzzing in her apron pocket. Then buzzing again, and again. She pulled it out and saw notification after notification. Someone had uploaded video of her playing to social media. It was already being shared. Comments were pouring in. "This waitress is amazing. Who is she? Where can I hear more?" This made me cry. Real talent. The notifications kept coming, dozens, then hundreds. The video was going viral. Mr. Russo pulled Elena aside, away from the crowd. "Listen to me. I don't know your whole story. I don't know why you're waiting tables when you can play like that. But I do know this. You're meant for bigger things. You need to figure out what you want." "Really want?" Elena looked back at the piano. At Catherine and Robert, still holding each other at their table. At the crowd of people who'd stopped their Friday evening to witness her performance. At the business card in her hand from a real music producer. 3 years ago, she'd made a choice.
She'd chosen responsibility over dreams.
She'd chosen practical over passionate, and it had been the right choice at the time. Her family had needed her, but maybe, just maybe, it was time for a different choice. Can I
take tomorrow off?"
Elena asked Mr. Russo. "I need to think." He smiled. "Take the whole weekend." "And Elena, whatever you decide, thank you for tonight. You turned my restaurant into something magical." As Elena finally made her way to the back to clock out, her hands were still shaking. She looked at them. These hands that had served thousands of plates, poured countless glasses of wine, wiped down endless tables. These hands that could also create beauty. These hands that could move people to tears. These hands that she'd been wasting. The first notes came out softer than Elena intended. Her fingers felt stiff, uncertain, like they'd forgotten the conversation they used to have with piano keys. She'd chosen Clair de Lune by Debussy, a piece that most people recognized even if they didn't know its name. It was beautiful, emotional, but not too complicated. Safe. The opening measures floated through the dining room, gentle as a whisper. At first nobody noticed. The clatter of silverware continued. Conversations kept going. A child at table 4 was still crying about not wanting to eat vegetables. Life in the restaurant carried on as normal. Elena's heart hammered in her chest, but her fingers kept moving. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. Even after 8 months away from a real piano, her hands remembered. C sharp, E B. The familiar patterns emerged like an old language she'd thought she'd forgotten but had really just been sleeping. Then something shifted. The couple at table 6 stopped talking mid-sentence. The woman tilted her head, listening. Her husband followed her gaze toward the piano. At table 9, a businessman put down his fork and looked up from his phone. The music was working its magic the way it always did, quiet but insistent. You couldn't ignore beauty once you noticed it was there. Elena's nervousness began to ease as she moved deeper into the piece. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing steadied. This was familiar territory. She'd played this piece 100 times, maybe more, in her apartment, in practice rooms, in her final recital at the conservatory. More heads turned. A waiter stopped mid-step to listen. Tony, carrying a tray of drinks, nearly collided with a table because he was staring at Elena instead of watching where he was going. Diane stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, her mouth literally hanging open. The restaurant was getting quieter. Not silent, but noticeably quieter. Conversations dropped to murmurs. The crying child stopped and looked around, confused by the change in atmosphere. At the window table, Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. She grabbed Robert's arm and pointed toward the piano. Elena, still playing, caught the movement in her peripheral vision. She saw Catherine's face transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy. That look gave Elena confidence. Her fingers pressed the keys with more authority now. The middle section of Clair de Lune built in intensity, the melody swelling and falling like waves. This was the part that always gave people chills, where Debussy painted moonlight with sound. Elena forgot about being nervous. She forgot about her aching feet and her stained apron and the fact that she was supposed to be delivering dessert menus. For these few minutes, she was just a musician again. Nothing more, nothing less. The piece moved toward its conclusion, the notes becoming softer, more delicate, like the moon disappearing behind clouds. Elena's fingers danced across the final measures. The last note hung in the air, a single high C that faded slowly into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The restaurant was completely still. Then applause erupted. Not just polite golf clapping. Real applause. Catherine was standing at her table, clapping with her hands raised above her head. Robert stood too, beaming. Other diners joined in. The businessman at table 9 whistled. A family at table 3 clapped so enthusiastically their water glasses shook. Elena stood up from the piano bench, her face burning. She wasn't used to this anymore. At the conservatory, performances had been routine, but this felt different, more raw, more real. She gave a small, awkward bow and started to head back toward the kitchen, back to being a waitress. But before she could take 3 steps, Robert's voice called out across the restaurant. "Excuse me. Miss, wait, please." Elena turned. Robert was waving her over to their table. She walked toward them, aware that everyone was watching. "That was beautiful," Catherine said, and there were tears in her eyes. "Absolutely beautiful. I had no idea. When did Mr. Russo hire a pianist?" "He didn't," Elena said. "I'm actually your server. I overheard your story earlier, about how you met at a Chopin concert. And I thought maybe I could play something for your anniversary." Catherine pressed both hands to her chest. "You did that for us?" "Oh, my dear, that's the kindest thing." "Robert, can you believe this?" "Extraordinary," Robert agreed. He pulled out his wallet, but Elena quickly shook her head. "No, please. It was my pleasure, really." "Do you play professionally?" Catherine asked. "You must. That was too beautiful for just a hobby." Elena hesitated. How did she explain? I studied music at the Chicago Conservatory, but I work here now." She could see them processing this, trying to understand how someone with that level of training ended up waiting tables. But they were too polite to ask directly. "Well," Robert said, "whether you play professionally or not, you have a remarkable gift. Thank you for sharing it with us tonight." "Actually," Catherine said, her eyes bright with an idea, "do you know any Chopin? I know that's terribly forward of me to ask, but after you've already been so generous." Elena's stomach flipped. Did she know Chopin? She knew Chopin like the back of her hand, but Chopin was different from Debussy. Debussy was impressionist, dreamy, forgiving of small mistakes. Chopin was precise, technical, demanding. Chopin required skill. If she played Chopin, everyone would know she wasn't just someone who'd taken some lessons. They'd know she was trained. Really trained. I know some Chopin, Elena said carefully. Catherine's whole face lit up. Would you? I know you must be busy working, but would you consider playing just one piece? The Nocturne in E-flat major? The one Robert and I heard the night we met? Elena looked at Catherine's hopeful face, at Robert's gentle smile, at the other diners who were still watching, waiting to see what would happen next. She thought about that night 50 years ago when these two strangers sat in a concert hall and heard music that changed their lives. She thought about the power of beauty to connect people, to create moments that lasted across decades. And she thought about herself, about the 3 years she'd spent hiding what she really was, pretending her biggest dreams had never existed. Okay, Elena heard herself say. One more piece. Catherine clasped her hands together in delight. Robert squeezed his wife's shoulder, looking at her with the same love he probably had 50 years ago. Elena walked back to the piano. Her hands were shaking again, but differently this time. Not from nervousness, from anticipation, from something waking up inside her that had been dormant too long. She sat down at the bench and adjusted her position. This was it. No more hiding behind simple pieces. No more pretending she was less than she was. Mr. Russo had appeared from his office, drawn by the applause. He stood near the kitchen, watching with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Diane and Tony and the other servers had gathered too, abandoning their stations to see what was happening. The whole restaurant waited. Elena placed her hands on the keys. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most famous pieces ever written, technically challenging but emotionally devastating. If you played it right, it could break hearts. She closed her eyes for just a second, remembering her teacher's voice from years ago. Don't just play the notes, Elena, tell the story. Make them feel something. Elena opened her eyes and began. The opening measures were delicate, a simple melody that seemed almost fragile. But that was Chopin's genius. He started gentle and then took you on a journey. The left hand provided a steady accompaniment while the right hand sang the melody, each note placed with careful intention. This time the restaurant went silent immediately. Everyone recognized that something different was happening. This wasn't background music anymore. This was a performance. Elena's fingers moved with growing confidence. The piece unfolded like a story, quiet moments giving way to more passionate sections, then returning to tenderness. Her body swayed slightly with the music, an unconscious response to the emotion flowing through her hands. She wasn't just playing anymore. She was speaking in the only language that had ever made complete sense to her. Every note was a word. Every phrase was a sentence. And together they told a story about beauty and longing and the aching sweetness of life. In that moment, Elena wasn't a waitress at all. She was purely a musician. She was the person she'd trained to be. The person she'd never stopped being even when she'd tried to bury it under practical choices and family obligations. The piece built toward its climax. The melody soaring. Elena's fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision that came from years of practice, from thousands of hours spent in training. This wasn't luck or natural talent. This was mastery earned through dedication. As she played the final measures, bringing the piece back to its gentle beginning, Elena felt tears on her own cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. This was what music did. It cracked you open and reminded you that being human meant feeling things deeply. The last notes faded away. Elena kept her hands on the keys for a moment, not wanting to break the spell. Then the applause came again, but louder this time. Stronger. People weren't just clapping politely. They were moved. Some were standing. Many had their phones out, recording. Catherine was crying openly now, and Robert was wiping his own eyes, but Elena barely heard it. She was staring at her hands on the piano keys, at the calluses that had started to soften but were still faintly visible on her fingertips. She was feeling the weight of what she'd just done. She'd revealed herself. After 3 years of hiding, of playing it safe, of being someone smaller than she really was. She'd finally shown people who she truly was, and there was no taking it back now. The Friday evening rush hit Giorgio's like it always did, all at once. By 6:30, nearly every table was full. Elena moved between customers with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, remembering modifications, keeping her smile fixed even when her feet screamed for a break. She was carrying a tray of appetizers when she noticed Mr. Russo near the front entrance, talking animatedly with an older couple. His hands were gesturing in that way he did when he was trying to impress someone. Elena delivered the appetizers to table 9 and glanced back at the entrance. The couple looked to be in their 70s. The man wore a well-tailored navy suit, and the woman had on an elegant silver dress with a pearl necklace. They both had that air about them, the kind that came from old money and good breeding. Mr. Russo was practically bowing as he led them to the best table in the house, right by the window with a view of the city lights starting to twinkle in the dusk. "Elena," Mr. Russo called out, waving her over. "This table is yours tonight. These are very special guests." She approached with her notepad ready. "Good evening. Welcome to Giorgio's." The older man smiled warmly at her. "Thank you, dear. We're celebrating tonight. 50 years married to this beautiful woman." His wife blushed and swatted his arm playfully. "Oh, Robert, stop it. 50 years?" Elena felt genuine happiness bubble up. "That's incredible. Congratulations." "Thank you," the woman said, her eyes crinkling with joy. "We've been coming to this restaurant for anniversaries for years. It's become our tradition." Elena had actually served them before she realized. Maybe twice. They were always kind, always polite, and they tipped well. The kind of customer servers loved. "I'll make sure everything is perfect for you tonight," Elena promised. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" They ordered wine, a nice Chianti, and Elena hurried to get it. When she returned, Mr. Russo was still hovering nearby, clearly wanting everything to go smoothly for these VIP customers. As Elena poured the wine, she overheard the man, Robert, speaking to Mr. Russo in a lower voice. "I tried to arrange a surprise for Catherine. I'd hired a pianist to come and play during dinner. She loves piano music, you see. But the musician called this afternoon and canceled. Some family emergency." Elena's hand steadied the wine bottle, but her ears perked up. Mr. Russo made sympathetic noises. "I'm so sorry to hear that. If I had known, perhaps we could have arranged something. Unfortunately, our piano is just decorative. None of my staff plays." Elena's heart started beating faster. She finished pouring and set the bottle down, trying to look like she wasn't listening. Catherine, the wife, hadn't heard their conversation. She was looking around the restaurant, taking it all in. Then her eyes landed on the grand piano in the corner. Her whole face lit up. "Oh, Robert, look. They have a piano. What a beautiful instrument." Robert followed her gaze, and his expression became bittersweet. "Yes, dear. It is beautiful. Do they ever have anyone play it?" Catherine asked hopefully. "No, I'm afraid it's just for atmosphere," Mr. Russo interjected apologetically, "though I agree it would be wonderful to have live music." Catherine's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, that's all right. It's still lovely to look at. You know, Robert, that's what I was thinking about today. Do you remember the first time we met?" Robert took her hand. "Of course I do. How could I forget? It was at that concert hall in downtown Chicago," Catherine continued, her voice soft with memory. "I'd gone with my roommate from college. They were performing Chopin's Nocturnes. I'd saved up for weeks to afford the ticket. And I was sitting right behind you," Robert added. "When the pianist played Nocturne in E-flat major, you started crying. I saw tears on your cheek. The music was just so beautiful," Catherine said, smiling at the memory. "I'd never heard anything like it performed live before. And then during intermission, this handsome young man tapped me on the shoulder and offered me his handkerchief." Elena felt something stir in her chest. She was supposed to be moving on to check other tables, but she found herself rooted to the spot, listening. "Smoothest move I ever made," Robert chuckled, though it was a genuine offer. "You really were crying. And then you asked if I'd like to get coffee after the concert, and I said yes, and—" Catherine squeezed his hand. "Here we are. 50 years later, 50 years later," Robert echoed. "All because of Chopin." Mr. Russo dabbed at his eyes. "That's beautiful. Truly. I wish I could have made tonight more special with that pianist." "Oh, you already have," Catherine assured him. "Just being here with Robert is enough." But Elena could see it in Catherine's eyes. That wistful look toward the piano, the way she kept glancing at it as if imagining music filling the air. Elena moved away to check on her other tables, but her mind was racing. She took orders on autopilot. She delivered food without really seeing it. That story about the concert, about Chopin, about a love that started with music. It had struck something deep inside her. She knew those pieces. The nocturnes. She'd performed them in her 3rd year at the conservatory. She'd practiced them until her hands cramped until she could play them in her sleep. And she absolutely knew that she could play them right now if she sat down at that piano. But could she? Should she? The reasonable part of her brain said no. She was at work. She was a waitress, not a performer. What if she messed up? What if she embarrassed herself and Mr. Russo and ruined this couple's anniversary dinner? But another part of her, a part that had been sleeping for 3 years, was suddenly wide awake. This couple's story. The way Catherine's face had fallen when she learned nobody played the piano. The mention of Chopin, of all things, it felt like a sign. Like the universe was putting this moment right in front of her and asking, "What are you going to do?" Elena went back to the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she entered orders into the computer. Diane noticed and bumped her shoulder. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," Elena said automatically, but she wasn't fine. Her whole body was buzzing with an energy she hadn't felt in years. It was like every cell in her body was saying, "Do it, do it, do it." She served the anniversary couple their entrees. They complimented everything. Catherine ordered the risotto, Robert the osso buco. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, talking and laughing together with the ease of 2 people who'd spent a lifetime learning each other. As Elena cleared their plates, Catherine said, "Could we see the dessert menu, dear?" "Of course. I'll be right back." Elena walked toward the server station, but instead of grabbing a dessert menu, she found herself walking straight to Mr. Russo's office. She knocked on the doorframe. He was doing paperwork and looked up in surprise. "Elena, everything okay with the anniversary couple?" "Yes, sir. Everything's perfect. I need to ask you something. What is it?" She took a deep breath. This was crazy. This was completely crazy. But the words came out anyway. "I can play piano." Mr. Russo stared at her. "What?" "The piano. In the dining room. I can play it. I went to music school. I'm trained. Classical music. I know the pieces that woman was talking about. The Chopin." His eyebrows shot up. "You're serious?" "Yes, sir." "Elena, in 3 years you never mentioned you could play piano." "I know. It's a long story. But I overheard what that man said about wanting to surprise his wife with a pianist. And if you'd let me, I could play something during my break. Just something simple. For their anniversary." Mr. Russo leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're sure you can do this? These are important customers. I won't embarrass you," Elena said firmly. "I promise. If you want, I can play something very soft background music. Nothing that would disrupt the other diners. But I think it would make their night special." He was quiet for a long moment. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought he might hear it. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, but keep it quiet, tasteful. Nothing too showy. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you." As Elena walked back out to the dining room, her hands were trembling. What had she just done? She was about to play piano in front of a restaurant full of people, in her work uniform, after not touching a real piano in 8 months. But when she looked over at Catherine and Robert, sitting together in the soft candlelight, their hands intertwined across the table, she knew she'd made the right decision. She approached their table with the dessert menu. "I have something special planned," she said quietly. "If you'll just give me a few minutes." Catherine looked confused but intrigued. "Of course, dear." Elena walked to the piano. Her legs felt like jelly. Every server in the restaurant was going to see her do this. Every customer. There was no hiding anymore. She stood in front of the piano for a moment, just staring at it. The glossy black surface reflected the restaurant lights. She could see her own reflection, a tired waitress in a white shirt and black apron. But underneath that reflection was the girl who used to dream of concert halls, the young woman who'd played for hours until her fingers ached. The musician she'd buried 3 years ago. It was time to let her breathe again. Elena lifted the key cover. The ivory keys gleamed up at her like old friends. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her fingers on the keys. The entire restaurant was still buzzing with conversation. Nobody was paying attention to her yet. This was her moment right before everything changed. She took one more deep breath. Thought of Catherine and Robert and their love story that began with Chopin, and began to play. The lunch rush had finally died down at Giorgio's Italian restaurant, and Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her feet ached in those required black non-slip shoes that every server knows too well. She'd been on her feet for 6 hours straight, and the dinner crowd would start pouring in within 2 hours. She grabbed her cleaning cloth and spray bottle, moving from table to table in the main dining room. This had been her routine for the past 3 years. Clock in, smile at customers, take orders, dodge the occasional rude comment, collect tips, clock out, repeat. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself at 28, but it paid the bills mostly. As Elena wiped down table 7 by the window, her eyes drifted to the corner of the restaurant. There it sat like a beautiful piece of furniture that nobody quite knew what to do with. A glossy black grand piano that Mr. Russo, the owner, had purchased 6 months ago at an estate sale. He'd been so proud of it, going on and on about how it made the place look more sophisticated, more European. The thing was, it was just for show. Nobody played it. Mr. Russo didn't play. None of the staff played. It sat there collecting dust, looking pretty, occasionally getting bumped by servers carrying heavy trays who cut the corner too close. But Elena knew something that nobody else at Giorgio's knew. She could play that piano, not just play it. She could make it sing. Her fingers twitched slightly as she stared at it, the way they always did when she looked at a piano. It was an automatic response now, built into her muscle memory after years of training. Her right hand unconsciously moved against her thigh, fingering invisible keys in the pattern of a scale. C major, then D major. Her hands knew these movements better than anything else in the world. Hey, Elena, table 12 needs more bread. The voice snapped her back to reality. It was Tony, one of the other servers, calling from across the room. Got it, she called back, tucking the cloth into her apron pocket. As she headed to the kitchen, she passed the piano again. She let her hand brush against its smooth surface for just a moment. The touch sent a familiar ache through her chest. It had been 8 months since she'd actually played a real piano. 8 long months. In the kitchen, the usual chaos greeted her. Pots clanging, orders being shouted, the head chef cursing in Italian at a burnt sauce. Elena grabbed a basket, filled it with warm bread, and headed back out. Her co-worker, Diane, caught her arm on the way. You okay? You look like you're somewhere else today. Elena forced a smile. Just tired. Long week, you know? Diane nodded sympathetically. Tell me about it. My feet are killing me. Hey, did you see Mr. Russo brought in some flowers for that piano? Like it's a shrine or something. Elena glanced over. Sure enough, there was a small vase of flowers sitting on top of the piano now. Yeah, I saw. Such a waste, Diane continued, heading toward her own tables. Beautiful instrument just sitting there. Do you think anyone in this whole place even knows how to play piano? Elena didn't answer. She just delivered the bread to table 12 and took their drink orders. The truth was complicated. Yes, she could play. More than that, she'd spent 15 years of her life preparing to be a professional pianist. She'd started lessons when she was 7 years old. By the time she was 12, she was winning regional competitions. At 15, she'd performed a full recital that had people talking. Her teacher, old Mrs. Chen, used to say she had magic in her fingers. She'd gotten into the Chicago Conservatory of Music on a partial scholarship. It was one of the best music schools in the country. Her parents had been so proud. Her mother had cried at her acceptance letter. Her father had posted about it on social media for weeks. Those 4 years at the conservatory had been the best of her life. She'd practiced 6 hours a day, sometimes more. She learned pieces by Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Liszt. She performed in student concerts. She dreamed of concert halls and recording contracts and making a living doing what she loved most in the world. Then real life happened. Her father had a stroke during her senior year. Massive medical bills piled up. Her younger brother needed help with college. Her mother couldn't work full-time while taking care of her father. Suddenly, the family needed money. Real money. Fast money. Not the kind of uncertain income that came from trying to make it as a classical pianist. Elena had graduated. Sure, but instead of auditioning for orchestras or applying for graduate programs, she'd gotten a job. This job. Waitressing. Because it paid immediately and it paid in cash tips that she could bring home to help her family. That was 3 years ago. Her father had recovered mostly. Her brother had finished school. Things had stabilized, but by then Elena had fallen out of practice. Her calluses had softened. Her repertoire had gotten rusty. The professional music world had moved on without her. She told herself she'd get back to it, someday, when she had more time, when she had more money saved, when things were different. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. And here she was, 28 years old, wiping down tables and pretending she'd never been anything more than a waitress.